Probably like many of you, I dream of owning a house one day, but I definitely am not at a point in my life that I can afford it, but I can make a miniature version. Our project challenge for April over on Patreon was Dream, so I thought it would be a perfect time to make my dream home. I have always absolutely loved Victorian houses. I've had probably the most requests to make the Pink Palace from Coraline, and this isn't that, but it is kind of in the same vein, so hopefully it's something that you'll all be interested in, or maybe you'll just be disappointed it isn't Coraline. Either way, as always, I am starting by building the main structure of the house, starting with the lid of one of my cookie tin projects, which is going to be the base in the end of this project. I've been trying to build at a smaller scale recently so that projects will take up less space. Victorian homes in general have quite a lot of difficult shapes to create compared to modern architecture, so I drew out the base of the house on a pizza box and started building up from there. I am going to build lights into this project, so I had to cut a hole in the bottom of that base that the lights will thread up through in the end. I started by building the porch foundation and elevating the house slightly off the ground. One of the elements that I've always loved about a lot of Victorian homes are the big wraparound porches. So I wanted to have a front porch that wraps around the side and leads to the back of the house. The thing about porches is that they do tend to make the interior of the house where the porch is a little bit darker, which I don't necessarily like, but we're not going for practicality. We're going for the fantasy here. I'm painting underneath where I'm gonna lay some wood texture, and then I cut out a bunch of really tiny pieces of paperboard to lay on the porch as wood beams. I drew out the front of the house in the shape that it needed to be. Because there were so many different complicated shapes for this house, before I started building it, I actually made a model of it in Blender, which was super helpful to have as reference. A lot of Victorian homes have little tower-like structures. The towers are essentially just octagons, so I cut strips of paperboard and taped them together so that I can attach them together later. After I had all the different pieces of the house cut out, I had to start cutting out the windows. I am kind of obsessed with windows, so I really took this as my challenge to make something with the most different kinds of windows that still looked cohesive as I could. I'm not gonna lie to you, this was probably one of the most tedious parts of the process. Take it back. Who needs a bunch of windows? I hate windows, in fact. Before I start putting any of the actual house together, I needed to start working on some of the details of the facade of the house. I made some pieces from paperboard to create the dimension for the door. I also wanted the door to have this cool custom crescent moon shaped window. You all know that I love moons and celestial imagery, so there will be some of that. You know I had to do it. Would it be my house if there was not a moon on it? As always, I'm running into roadblocks left and right while building this. I injured my hand in a non-crafting related incident, and I couldn't really move it for about a week. So why couldn't it have been my left hand? I glued on a bunch of the details for the doors and some decorative wood details, and then I had to start cutting out strips of cardstock for siding. And the never-ending story of siding begins.
This is the never-ending story.
This is all that I am. I'll always show you the best of me. Gotta feel it. I've been doing it. So tell me where you at.
There are actually quite a few different types of Victorian houses. This design is coming from a lot of different places rather than it being in one specific style. I personally really like the Queen Anne Victorian homes, which is kind of the quintessential Victorian home. And I also really like the folk Victorian style. I just absolutely love all of the super detailed wood finishes, especially the different trims and gable end treatments. I just feel like it adds so much charm and warmth that is kind of absent from a lot of modern architecture. I had this idea for an attic area that has a little porch at the very top of the house. I made things a lot harder for myself, as always, when I decided that I wanted the siding to wrap all the way around the house. I left it really long, laid it on the front, and then wrapped it around as I attached each next piece of the house. I wouldn't say this was necessarily the best idea, and it made everything a lot harder for a result that I don't necessarily feel was entirely worth it. Not to just go off on a completely unrelated aside, but that's exactly what I'm gonna do. I just want to talk about how the library is the single greatest public resource that we have. Having a library card is like having a credit card that you don't have to pay for afterwards. I get the same thrill putting a book on hold as some people do buying things online, and then going to pick up the book and getting to read it for free. Support your local libraries, folks.
I'd like to spend my vacation at the library!
One of the things that I've had in mind basically since the beginning of thinking about a dream home is that I really want it to be purple with seafoam green accents. If you've been around here for quite a while, this might sound familiar because I actually did build a version of this for a Christmas video that I did quite a few years ago. The one that I'm building now is obviously a lot closer to what I would ideally want, but it did have those colors going on. That's still the dream. Of course, to bring the texture of the siding out a little bit more, as always, I am going in and dry brushing just a slightly lighter purple color all over the house. And then we can finally start working on the trim. I'm not gonna lie, I would love to put this on here just like this and go full Tim Burton stop motion movie, but I think we just gotta do the wave. In hindsight, the way I went about this might be one of my greatest regrets of this project. I'm using this string that we had laying around, and I originally wanted it to be a little bit thinner, but I always just use what we have. So this wasn't the ideal size for the trim. I say the biggest regret like it's some big dramatic thing, but it's really not. It turned out fine. I just would probably do it differently if I was gonna do it again. I say this every single video, but I absolutely love using yarn and string in projects because it's really versatile. You can wrap it and use it around curved shapes because it's flexible.
Weight of the world on your shoulders. Cause yours to is your mind. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 7 days a week.
In the attic area, I added additional crescent moon windows, and I just went around those with puffy paint. I painted all of the wood details with a cherry wood color. I just absolutely love that cherry wood finish. And since it's me, of course, I gotta add some little star details. So I cut out these tiny paperboard stars. They were so incredibly difficult to cut out. I had to cut out quite a few of them because I ended up wrapping this around some of the other areas of the house, and then I had to glue those into their spots in the wood frames. Every single time that I cut out stars, they always end up looking like Sokka's little carving for Yue. I also added a trim piece near the tops of the towers, and then we had to start working on our porch railings. I did something very similar to this on the roof of Aunt Josephine's house. I'm just cutting some really thin strips of a popsicle stick and painting them white to be the slats, and then laying them on around the perimeter of each porch, of which there are 3. As with many things in this project, this was a long process. That is why I am here with you 2 months later. Then to make the bottom rail and the handrail, I'm laying on some thin yarn. Before I go ahead and attach the house onto the base, I need to make sure that all of the floor is painted. The back of the house is going to have an attached greenhouse, so I decided to put a black and white tile design on that floor. Excuse me, did you not want me to work on my project? Roadblocks from every direction. And then I needed to Mod Podge all of the floors to make them look like tile and sealed wood. To make the porch posts, I'm using pieces of a little skewer, painted that white, and then cut small pieces to be the base. For the main body of them, I am using these molding nails. They're kind of twisty and decorative, which is really great for this project. attached everything together, painted those white, and then attached those onto the porch as well. I must admit that I should have refrained from attaching them at this point because they ended up being too tall, and then I had to take them off, cut pieces down, and reattach them later. What a surprise. I added some doorknobs on all the different doors around. Since I'm not going to be making the interior of the house, I did paint the windows with glue so that they will be foggy and you can't really see in them very well, but you can still see the light coming through them. It kind of just acts as a diffusion material. I saw Tinu from Craftatastrophe do something really similar to this by sanding the plastic painted on the window panes. Again, probably not the greatest decision because I couldn't really get into the ends. There was probably a better way to do it, but I didn't do it, so. And then it was time to finally start working on the roof of the porch. I am just absolutely obsessed with the little half circle shingles that they have on some Victorian homes. They're so cute. It makes the house kind of look like a gingerbread house. Who doesn't want to live in a gingerbread house? So that means that I have to cut out strips and then cut them into a half circle pattern, like I've done in many of my previous videos. I finished off the side of the front roof and then capped off all of the roof points with a row of rectangular cardstock overlapping with each other. I painted all that, and then we finally had to attach the house to the base. One of the parts of the house that I was really excited about working on was the attached greenhouse on the back. I wouldn't necessarily say I know a heck of a lot about plants or gardening, but I do love plants and I do love greenhouses.
I want stuff growing when my friends come to visit.
So again, are we making this realistic? No. I am here for the fantasy, not the reality. I love when greenhouses have really pretty ornate windows. I'm making this in a lot of the same steps as I did with the house, cutting the window shapes and then started building up the shape onto the outside of the house. This is the one part that I am going to be making some interior details in, so I am leaving the windows clear so you can see in it. I built a few different little planters to go in the greenhouse out of paperboard. When I made my wet palette with a sponge, I cut off the top scouring part of it, and I thought that would be really great to use for foliage. So I am using some cut pieces of that in these to make some plants. I also wanted to make some hanging plants. So to make the pots, I'm using little beads of hot glue, painting them, and then sticking some little plant pieces again inside and attaching them to some unraveled pieces of yarn to hang from. Then I started placing everything in the greenhouse. This was one of the most fun parts of the process for me. I always love making little props. I added the top windows to the greenhouse. Of course, since I had added the siding to the house, it did change some of the measurements a little bit, which meant that things were a little bit off at the top where the house meets the greenhouse. So I just cut a little piece to cover that up, and then we'll hide that mistake with moss later. You gotta choose your battles, you know? Then I started making shutters that will go around some of the windows on the house. They're just paperboard that I'm painting to look like shutters. And before I close up the roof, I just had to add some tissue paper curtains on the inside to add that little element of a false interior. Before I put the roof on, I wanted to thread the lights up through. The lights are relatively cool toned, so I wanted to add that warm, cozy feel to them. To do that, I needed to color all of the little light points in with orange permanent marker. I feel like you can't see the color difference at all, but believe me, when all of them are together and lighting up a space, the color difference is pretty dramatic. Then I had to start building up the main roof. Looking like a shingle zoodle. That's a sentence I never thought I would say, but here we are. I laid down a cardboard base and then started laying on the shingle texture strips over that. One of the hardest parts of the roof to make was definitely the tower roofs because they have to come into a point essentially. So I cut out a bunch of triangles and just kind of balanced them up there like a house of cards to get the shape that I need. And naturally, everything was not the correct size. So rather than recutting out all of the shapes, I just filled in the spaces in between with joint compound, as always, since it's gonna be covered up. Then I connected the two parts of the roofs with a center roof. I painted the base of that first, then laid on the shingle strips over that. And as always, finished off the edges and painted those pieces to blend in. To finish off the peaks of the tower roofs, I am putting on a bead for a finial to sit in and painting those gray and then silver on top. Then I cut out strips of semicircles, again kind of like the roof, but this time to lay at the peaks of the roofs to add a kind of gingerbread house-like wood detail. I made some numbers for the house to go on the tiny piece of roof above the porch, and then started laying on some string to be kind of like a decorative trim over the porch. And then the porch is going to get a bunch of hanging plants as well, so I needed to make those again. These look so much like that one dot candy that comes on the strip. I hope somebody knows what I'm talking about. And then attaching all these little details onto the house. Then it was finally time to start working on the terrain for the base. I'm going to create a hill for the house to sit on. I am attaching a cardboard circle to the inside of the cookie tin lid so that it has a flat surface to sit on. The main point of this hill is because I need a place for the battery pack for the lights. I pretty much immediately forgot that that was the reason that I needed the hill. I forgot about the battery pack. I promise I am not secretly a goldfish.
Can they remember for 3 seconds? I'd wager.
Myth busted.
I started building a little enclosure for the battery pack to slide into. Whenever I say enclosure, I just think of the dinosaur enclosures in Operation Genesis. I feel like I talk about Operation Genesis too much, but somehow a lot of things remind me of it. I've included the battery pack like this before in quite a few projects. This one is very similar to the one I did in the Hobbit Hole project. Then I'm building up foil over top of that to make the height of the hill. And then it's paper mache time. I'm sure everyone's favorite part of every video. Once I got the paper mache in the shape that I wanted it to be, it is certainly a very interesting shape. I'll say that. I went over and stippled some texture into the top. Then we're just gonna be building up layers on top of that. So I started by painting it with a dirt color, so brown, and then started sprinkling dirt on top of that. After that texture was down, building up layers of different shades of green to create some grass. And then to proceed, we need to finally attach the house onto that base. I had to cover the wire for the battery pack and basically make a channel for it with some cardstock. There are also several places where the terrain and the house meet that I needed to build up so there weren't any gaps. Essentially just doing the same process again and blending it all together. While I was at it, I figured I should probably take this chance to try and add some additional detail onto the bottom foundation of the house. So I added some trim with cardstock and also painted on a lattice kind of texture in the middle. And then I Mod Podged over that like all of the other wood pieces in this project. I proceeded to blend everything else into the terrain to hide where I had patched up areas, and then started cutting some greenery from our sponge scourer again to lay in the yard. I wanted there to be stepping stones leading up to and around the house, so I cut those out from paperboard and added some paper mache mixture on top to create some stone texture. Then I started gluing them leading up to the house. I really wanted the yard to look not super perfectly manicured. I really like when it looks a little bit wild but still well kept and thought out. If it doesn't look like a wizard could potentially live in the house, honestly, what is the point? Then we're going in to cover up our mistakes with the greenhouse and just laying some moss over that. Here's the thing, I love when there's plants growing up a house, but I know how problematic it is. So as always, aesthetically pleasing, not practical necessarily. I blended in some of the bushes by adding the color that I had used with the grass, and then adding some flower pieces on, of course, as well. These flowers are some that I had left over from making Howl's bedroom. You just put the tissue paper in some watercolor dyed water, scrunch it up into a shape that you want, and then let it dry. I'm painting the back of the battery pack to blend everything in and make it a little bit more camouflaged. Painting those stepping stones and and adding some wildflowers on the grass throughout. Made a little front doormat, celestial themed, of course. And also a couple of little benches that I just threw together out of cardstock. This is what always happens when I work on a project. I just keep thinking of more little things that I want to make, so it just keeps going. One of the most fun things that I got to add at the end was this little mailbox. I thought it'd be so cute to have it in front of the house, so I just threw that together with some cardstock and some of the popsicle stick pieces. And I also had to put some tiny letters in it as well. We all know it's there, right? I ended up wanting to add some corbels on the right side of the house where the roof ends, so I made those with craft foam. I added some tiny little swirl yarn pieces to that porch trim, and then our house was finally complete. So let me show you around my house. It may be small, but everyone is welcome. Let's be honest, if I can have a house, one day I'll be happy, but if my house is ever even slightly like this, all of my dreams will have come true.
I feel so at home.
If anyone has invented a shrink ray, hit me up. I could just shrink myself down and live in this. I'm maybe willing to be Ariety at this point in our economy. I think at the end of projects, I always see the little faults and things I would have done differently, but I do love how this turned out generally. Shooting this project was so much fun. We are doing a day and night version as usual. Since it is up on a hill, I thought I should make a little hilly area for it to sit in. So I'm using this green fabric to be kind of like grass. You may have noticed, but I have indeed moved. Or you might not have noticed because my room looks exactly the same. But let me tell you, it was a lot of work to get it to look exactly the same. I may be easily moved, but I do not easily move.
Lots of unpacking.
Everything is propped up on some moving boxes this time. I wanted to create some hills, so I'm using some stuffed animals and just shoving them under the fabric to build out the landscape and frame the house a little. And we gotta make sure to iron the fabric. Nobody wants a creasy hill. To light this scene, I'm utilizing the daylight coming through the windows as ambient light, and then holding my ring light over the house to mimic the sun. I'm really just trying to match the lighting for compositing later. I'm gonna be adding in a sky to the background, so I filmed that separately as well out my window. For the night scene, I got this beautiful blue velvet star fabric to make some curtains for my room, but before I do that, I wanted to use it for the night background in this project. This is when we get to turn on the lights built into the house, of course, which I love how the light comes through the house. I have my ring light lighting that from the bottom to give it a little bit of a gradient since the sky is often lighter closer to the skyline. And then I'm just holding my lamp with a blue gel over the house to mimic moonlight. Of course, one of the most important parts of the process of shooting is having a dance break. If If you're not having fun while shooting, what is the point? I talked a little bit about compositing last time, and what I'm doing here is very much the same idea. So I thought this time I would talk a little about color grading. I always want to mention it that my Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro and the Pro version of DaVinci Resolve was provided to me by Blackmagic. But for anyone that's maybe wanting to learn editing, there is a free version of DaVinci Resolve. I would totally recommend it. It has such fantastic color tools, and it's just a really solid editing program that you can use for free. The way that I approach color always depends on the project and what mood we're going for, but I would say you can probably tell that I really love bright, vibrant colors. However, there's definitely a balance to it. Most of the time, I isolate some specific colors depending on the shot and dial those in a bit more. In this case, it was the purples and greens that I really wanted to bring out. I also sometimes change the hues a little bit so everything is more cohesive. I added in the sky and some birds, of course. Honestly, the night shots are always my favorite. I love the mix of color temperatures with moonlight and warm interior lights. Most of what I shot was relatively cool, so I might try and add in a little bit of the warm tones more into this by masking the area right around the house and warming that up just a little bit. That was my dream house. Let me know what you think, or maybe don't if you hate it. I would absolutely love to know what your dream houses would be like. Build them or draw them or paint them, or just tell me about it in the comments. Here are some amazing community projects that have been sent to me recently. Tag me in your projects. Since I just moved over on Patreon, I have been doing some little additional projects for my room. If you're interested in that, there will be a bonus video over there. And as always, I want to say the biggest thank you to everyone over on Patreon. You all keep the channel going and are so patient when there's big life events like this.